I really wanted to ask you specifically about this book that you just came out with, Who Killed the Constitution, The Fate of American Liberty from World War I to George W. Bush. I wanted to ask you specifically, first of all, just what led you to write this book now and why you think it's particularly relevant in our current political climate.
Well, I guess I was sort of under the impression that this would be an auspicious moment for a book like this, because there was there was a lot of interest in Ron Paul's presidential campaign, which in some ways revolved around the Constitution, and that in effect neither party really pays much attention to the Constitution. We pretend we have a Constitution, and we have so-called Constitution Day and so on and so forth, but it really doesn't play a huge role in the way the government is run. I mean, we just look at the bailouts that are being proposed and the power that's being given to the Treasury Secretary under this proposed bill, just to see if it would be laughable to say we have a Constitution after this. Absolutely laughable. I mean, there must be people at the Republican National Committee who just behind closed doors have a huge belly laugh over the poor suckers who send them donations thinking that they're defending the Constitution. I mean, come on. So I have a friend who's a professor in Connecticut who wrote a book called The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Constitution, and I had written a book called The Politically Incorrect Guide to American History, and they both did pretty well. And we thought, well, what if the two of us, put our heads together and each focused on the areas in which he had some kind of specialization, and we put out a really punchy, right in your face, with the Constitution being shredded on the front cover, title, Who Killed the Constitution, and really just explain what happened and try and overturn this myth that's surrounded our Constitution, namely that it plays a role in restraining the government. I mean, we're just really stating the obvious, but when you watch TV, it's almost as if reality doesn't exist. I mean, people still talk about the Constitution as if it matters. It doesn't, and it's too bad, but we're not going to get anywhere until we acknowledge it.
I'm familiar with the book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to American History, and The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Constitution, and those are like really good primers, I think, for people who just want to find out about some of these issues. How do you think who's the target audience for this book, would you say?
Well, in effect, it's really everybody. And I know, of course, every author would say that about any book, but what I mean by that is that some of my other books might have been directed, let's say, pitched more to libertarians, more to conservatives, that sort of thing. The assumption would be that would be the ready natural audience for books like that. But with this one, we thought that there are some people on the left who also are talking about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and civil liberties and things like that. And a book like this can have an appeal to them, because this is not a cheering, we're not a cheering section for the Republican Party. Well, needless to say, not for the Democratic Party either. But there are people on both sides of the divide who sort of know that something is wrong, but a lot of them will go only so far. They'll follow us on some problems in the way the Constitution is being treated, but they'll be complicit in others. And we want to take a strict constitutional line all down the road here on all these topics that we raise. So it's not just economic topics like seizing Americans' gold in 1933, things of that nature. It's also things like the military draft. Is that constitutional? Or we argue that it isn't. We look at the restrictions on freedom of speech. We look at the president signing statements, whereby he signs a bill, then he signs a statement saying, "Oh, by the way, I don't intend to enforce Clause C, and I intend to enforce Clause F in a way different from what was intended." We go through all this, the war powers of the president. That's been abused by both parties. So we're really all over the ideological map, if you believe certain reviewers. But actually, we're not. We're just constitutional, limited government, libertarian types as we analyze these issues.
Hey Tom, this is Matt Bianco, and I too want to thank you for giving us this time to talk to you about the book, and especially in light of the Constitution Day being just last Wednesday. It's kind of interesting that, because you say that both sides are talking about the Constitution now. Of course, unfortunately, they're only worried about the Constitution when it goes against something that they like. But if it agrees with them, if the violation agrees with them, then they're quiet about it. And you're trying to say, no, we need to argue for the Constitution, period, right?
Yeah, and we're also saying that when we say who killed the Constitution, of course, we're implicitly suggesting the Constitution is dead, and some people have taken offense at that suggestion. But, as I said earlier, the very fact that there has been no, as in zero, constitutional discussion when it comes to all these bailouts, the fact that, presidential candidates from major political parties can talk about health care, whether or not the government should take over one seventh of the whole economy. And again, the Constitution isn't even raised, and if it were, neither one of them would have the slightest idea how it was relevant. I mean, that's dead. I mean, it's true. We still do have presidential elections every 4 years, and we have a two-chamber legislature. I mean, certain structural aspects of the Constitution are observed, but anything beyond that, it's long gone. What we're doing in this book is trying to go through recent history and try and look at major milestones that got us to where we are today, which is, as I said, I mean, it's almost laughable to suggest that we even have a Constitution. I mean, the things that are still observed in the Constitution are only the skeletal things, only the mechanics, that is to say, the presidential election every 4 years, the bicameral legislature, that sort of thing. But otherwise, the Constitution is more or less ignored, and there are major identifiable milestones on that road, and this road we're on now. And one of them we talk about is in the late 30s in the Caroline Products decision. In that, footnote 4, which is actually just a footnote from the decision, footnote 4 says that whatever the federal government does is presumed to be constitutional. It's presumed to be constitutional. And it concedes that, yes, it's possible for the federal government to violate the Constitution, but, and then it explains all the different hoops you'd have to jump through to prove that it had done so. So that is quite an inversion of the system that we have now. It's quite an astonishing footnote. And then we have the 10th Amendment problem, which is, the 10th Amendment says the federal government has all the powers that are, has only the powers granted to it by the states, and that all other powers are retained by the states and the people. So it guarantees the self-government of the states, and it limits the federal government. And Thomas Jefferson said it was the cornerstone of the Constitution. In 1942, the Supreme Court said the 10th Amendment is just a tautology. That is to say, it's just really just a meaningless definitional statement, like all bachelors are unmarried, anything not delegated is retained. And so they didn't think it actually had any real content. So there goes your cornerstone of the Constitution, at which my co-author Kevin Gutzman, who has a law degree, can tell me that at these sort of cram sessions, when you're taking courses to study for your bar exam, when the test-taking advisor gets to the multiple choice section, he says to you that anytime you see a multiple choice question in which one of the answers that's proposed to you is the 10th Amendment, you can eliminate that answer because it's always wrong. The 10th Amendment is never the right answer. So that's where we've gone in really just 7 really short years. Not to say that there haven't been abuses, there weren't abuses before, earlier than 70 years ago. But, oftentimes these sorts of things like I've just said are not exactly highlighted. I mean, I don't know any high school students who have ever heard of footnote 4. I don't know any high school students who have been taught about what happened to the 10th Amendment or what the 10th Amendment was supposed to do. I mean, it's just not even on the table. It's not anywhere. You won't learn this stuff about basic things about your own Constitution in school, in the media, whatever. I mean, it's certainly not in politics. Forget that. So Kevin and I just decided the time was right to try and tell some of this truth that Americans need if they're going to make intelligent decisions, and just try and rip the mask off of this facade.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's true. Like the stuff you're naming, I didn't learn about footnote 4 in school. I didn't learn about any of those things.
Me either. Yeah, I had to learn about it, while I was writing books. Basically, I should have already known that, of course.
Right. Well, so you said that the Constitution has been killed. It's not being killed. It has been killed. The cover of your book has a picture of the Constitution going through a shredder. In light of it being dead, in light of it having been shred, what are the positive advantages to continuing to try to use it?
Well, the good that's in it, it depends on what you're using it for. And it's good to use it as a bludgeon against the federal government, because sometimes that can be the thing that wakes people up and makes them realize something's wrong. and it can make them maybe look into more about what they thought they knew about their own government. If they see the contempt in which their government holds the Constitution that everybody is taught to revere, well, that can be the very first blow struck on behalf of independent thought and starting to think through and, becoming more interested and more informed about what's going on. It can get people to start reading the right books and going to the right websites when they realize, well, something is really, really wrong here. I know the Constitution says X and they're doing Y. Or I know the Constitution nowhere says X and they're doing X. I think that's the role that it can play. You can use it as a bludgeon against the federal government, but you shouldn't expect that they're suddenly going to see the light and start observing it. But it can be a way to inform your fellow Americans that something is seriously wrong with the system.
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, over time that has been happening. We've had here in Ohio, we had Senator Taft. In your book, you mentioned Congressman Bender, who called for the impeachment of Truman for violations that he performed. So people have hearkened back to the Constitution. We need to continue that fight. Did you want to tell us anything about anything you've got coming up in the future in closing, just any events you might have going on, speeches, interviews?
Well, I've got some things going around on at home the rest of the year, so I'm not doing much travel the rest of the year. But in early 2009, I've got some appearances that are all listed at my website, which is thomasewoods.com. And there and at Amazon or in bookstores, you can get Who Killed the Constitution or any of the other things that I've been up to these past few years.
All right, that's great. Thanks a lot. We appreciate your time and the opportunity to speak with you.
Okay, thanks again for having me. Appreciate it.